The story begins in a quiet, sunlit room where the grandmother sits in her favorite armchair by the window, holding a cup of tea that is long gone cold. Her gaze is distant, her eyes fixed on a world far beyond the garden outside, where flowers sway gently in the afternoon breeze. The tranquility of the moment contrasts sharply with the storm of emotions brewing within her. In her hands, she cradles a worn photo album, its edges frayed with age and use, but its contents cherished beyond measure. Each photograph tells a story, capturing fragments of a life filled with joy, sorrow, and countless moments in between. Yet, as she flips through the pages, there is one glaring absence: a photograph that was once nestled inside a golden locket, now lost to the sands of time. The locket wasn't just an heirloom. It was the heartbeat of her family's history, a tangible connection to a lineage that stretched back generations. Passed down from her grandmother, who received it on her wedding day, the locket was imbued with layers of meaning and sentiment. Inside its intricately designed casing was the last photograph taken of her parents, a black and white snapshot frozen in time, their smiles radiating warmth and love. Alongside the photograph was a folded slip of paper, a handwritten note from her mother, penned in delicate cursive, offering words of wisdom and encouragement that had guided her through life's darkest moments. "Always remember, love is the strongest thread that binds us," it read. These simple words became her anchor during turbulent times, a mantra she clung to whenever life felt overwhelming. The loss of the locket was a wound that never fully healed. She remembered the day it went missing as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind of day where the air carries a hint of nostalgia and the golden leaves blanket the ground like a tapestry. She had been preparing for a family gathering, bustling around the house, when she realized the locket wasn't around her neck where it always rested. At first, she assumed it had slipped off while she was cleaning or baking. Panic set in as she tore through the house, overturning cushions, rummaging through drawers, and retracing her steps a dozen times over. Hours turned into days and days into weeks, yet the locket was nowhere to be found. At one point, she considered the possibility that it had been stolen. A repairman had visited the house shortly before the locket disappeared, and though she hated to suspect anyone, the timing gnawed at her. She even reported the loss to the police, but without proof or leads, the case went cold. Her heart broke a little more with each passing day as hope dwindled. Friends and family offered comforting words, telling her that it was just an object and that memories couldn't be stolen. But she knew they didn't understand. The locket wasn't just an object. It was her parents' legacy, a symbol of their love and sacrifices, and a reminder of the values they had instilled in her. Without it, she felt as though a part of herself had been erased. As the years went by, she tried to move on, burying the pain beneath the demands of everyday life. She stopped talking about the locket, even to her closest friends and family, not because she had forgotten, but because the wound was too raw. To speak of it was to reopen the floodgates of grief, to confront the guilt she felt for losing something so precious. Her grandson, her only living family, had grown up hearing only fragments of the story, pieced together from overheard conversations and faded photographs. She had always intended to tell him the full tale, but each time the moment presented itself, the words caught in her throat. Now, as she sat in her quiet living room, the weight of the loss felt as fresh as it did all those years ago. The photo album in her lap was both a comfort and a torment, a reminder of all she had loved and lost. Her thoughts drifted to her grandson, who was visiting later that day. He was a curious young man, full of questions about their family's history, and she wondered if she should finally share the story of the locket with him. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to break the silence. Perhaps, by sharing her grief, she could begin to heal, or just maybe spark a glimmer of hope that the locket might one day find its way back to her. Later that evening, the grandson arrived at his grandmother's modest home, his face bright with the energy of youth, a stark contrast to her weary demeanor. He was a tall, lanky young man with an inquisitive nature that often reminded her of her late husband. He had always possessed a natural curiosity, asking questions that others wouldn't dare and finding joy in uncovering the smallest of mysteries. Tonight, as they sat together in the cozy glow of the living room lamp, that same curiosity flickered in his eyes. He had come to visit her with a purpose, having recently started a genealogy project for his university history class. It was a project that, unbeknownst to her, would soon reignite a search she had long since abandoned. As they chatted over tea and a plate of freshly baked cookies, the conversation naturally turned toward family history. He asked her about her childhood, her parents, and the stories of her upbringing that she had always been reluctant to share in too much detail. For years, she had preferred to focus on the present, believing the past to be a closed chapter. But something about his eager interest touched a part of her that had been dormant for too long. His questions were thoughtful, not just about dates and names, but about the emotions and experiences that shaped their family story. He wanted to know more about her parents, their values, and the legacy they had left behind. It was in this moment, as he gently prodded her for more details, that she found herself reaching for the photo album. Her hands trembled as she opened it, turning the pages with a reverence that mirrored the sacredness of its contents. She pointed out photographs of her parents, sharing anecdotes about their lives and the lessons they had taught her. Her father had been a stoic but kind man, a carpenter who believed in the dignity of honest work. Her mother, on the other hand, had been a dreamer, full of warmth and creativity, always encouraging her to see the beauty in the world. These were stories she hadn't told in years, and as the words spilled from her lips, she felt a weight lifting from her chest. Then, almost without realizing it, she mentioned the locket. Her voice faltered as she described its intricate design, the way the sunlight would catch its golden surface, making it glow like a tiny treasure chest. She told him about the photograph it held, her parents' smiles frozen in time, and the note from her mother that had been her guiding star. For a moment, she hesitated, debating whether to continue, but his attentive gaze encouraged her to press on. She explained how the locket had been passed down through generations, a symbol of their family's resilience and love, and how its loss had left a void she couldn't quite articulate. Her grandson listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had always known his grandmother to be a strong, resilient woman, but tonight he saw a vulnerability in her that he had never witnessed before. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a piece of her soul, a connection to a past that she had fought hard to preserve. He felt a pang of guilt for not knowing sooner, for not asking the right questions before. But more than that, he felt a surge of determination. As she spoke, he realized that the story of the locket wasn't just her story. It was his as well. It was a thread that tied him to a family he had never met, to a legacy he was only beginning to understand. "Grandma," he said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them, "if you could have the locket back, what would it mean to you?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she couldn't find the words. Finally, she whispered, "It would mean everything. It would mean a home." Her answer resonated deeply within him, stirring a sense of purpose he couldn't ignore. He leaned forward, his voice steady with resolve. "Then I'll find it for you. Whatever it takes, I'll bring it back." She looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism, her heart aching at the thought of him embarking on a search that might only lead to disappointment. "It's been decades, my dear. I wouldn't even know where to tell you to start." "That's okay," he replied with a small smile. "I'll start where all good stories do, at the beginning." Over the next hour, they combed through the photo album together, piecing together fragments of the past that might hold clues to the locket's whereabouts. She recounted the day it went missing, describing the people who had visited her home around that time and the places she had searched. Though the details were hazy, his sharp mind latched onto every word, forming a mental map of possibilities. As the evening wore on, her initial reluctance gave way to a quiet hope, fueled by his unwavering determination. As he left that night, a plan already forming in his mind, she felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude for his effort, fear the heartbreak he might face, and a glimmer of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. For the first time in decades, the locket didn't feel entirely lost. Perhaps, just perhaps, the threads of fate were beginning to weave their way back together. The following morning, the grandson woke up with a sense of purpose that ignited his soul like a firestorm. The story of the locket played over and over in his mind, each word his grandmother had spoken filling him with an insatiable desire to uncover its fate. He couldn't shake the image of her wistful smile as she described its intricate design, nor the catch in her voice as she spoke of the photograph and note it once held. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was her connection to her past, to her parents, and to the values that had shaped their family. He knew he couldn't rest until he had done everything in his power to find it. With the resolve of a man on a mission, he poured himself a strong cup of coffee and sat down with his laptop, ready to dive into the unknown. He began by scouring online forums and local community boards, searching for any mention of lost heirlooms or vintage lockets matching his grandmother's description. Each search brought up thousands of results, but none seemed to fit. Undeterred, he widened his scope, visiting websites for antique shops and pawn shops in the area, hoping that one of them might hold a clue. Hours turned into days as he pored over listings and contacted shop owners. His inquiries met with polite but unhelpful responses. Still, he refused to give up. He even ventured into the digital archives of local newspapers, scanning decades-old classifieds for any mention of a gold locket. Though the process was tedious, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction with each step he took. Every call he made, every lead he followed, brought him closer to the truth, or so he hoped. But his search wasn't confined to the digital world. He visited antique shops and pawn shops in person, armed with a sketch of the locket that he had drawn based on his grandmother's description. Each time, he would explain its significance, his voice filled with the kind of earnestness that made people stop and listen. Some shop owners shook their heads apologetically, while others offered to keep an eye out for similar items. Though he left each shop empty-handed, he couldn't ignore the growing sense of connection he felt to his grandmother's story. With every question he asked, he learned more about her life and the sacrifices she had made, her strength and resilience becoming clearer with each passing day. One afternoon, while flipping through old family records in his grandmother's attic, he stumbled upon a faded receipt that made his heart skip a beat. It was dated nearly 40 years ago and bore the name of a local pawn shop, one that still existed, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The receipt didn't specify what had been pawned, but the possibility that it could be related to the locket was enough to send him rushing out the door. When he arrived at the shop, the owner, a kind elderly man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, listened patiently as he explained his story. The man nodded thoughtfully, then disappeared into the back room, returning moments later with a ledger so old its pages were yellowed with age. Together, they combed through the entries, searching for any mention of a gold locket. The grandson's heart pounded as they came across an entry that matched the date on the receipt. Gold locket, intricate design, with photograph inside, the owner read aloud, his voice tinged with curiosity. It was a small victory, a glimmer of hope in what had felt like an endless journey. But that hope was short-lived. The owner explained that the locket had been sold decades ago to another pawn shop in a neighboring city. It was a dead end, or so it seemed. Rather than feeling defeated, the grandson saw this as a new starting point. He thanked the shop owner profusely, his gratitude genuine, before setting off on his next lead. Over the next several weeks, he visited shop after shop, tracing the locket's journey like a detective piecing together a puzzle. Each visit brought its own set of challenges: shop owners who were skeptical of his motives, records that were incomplete or missing entirely, and the ever-present possibility that the locket had been melted down or lost forever. Yet he pressed on, driven by the memory of his grandmother's tear-filled eyes as she spoke of its importance. His search wasn't just about the locket anymore. Along the way, he found himself reflecting on the values his grandmother had instilled in him: perseverance, compassion, and the importance of family. He thought about the sacrifices she had made to raise him after his parents passed away, about the countless ways she had shown her love through actions rather than words. The search became a way for him to honor her, to give back to the woman who had given him everything. As he delved deeper into the world of antiques and heirlooms, he encountered stories of others who had lost pieces of their past. Some shared tales of recovery and reunion, while others spoke of their continued search, their voices tinged with both hope and sorrow. These encounters only strengthened his resolve, reminding him that the locket wasn't just a physical object. It was a vessel for the memories and emotions that made them human. He began to see the locket as a symbol, not just of his grandmother's past, but of the enduring strength of their family's bond. One evening, as he sat in his apartment surrounded by maps, receipts, and notes, he felt a pang of doubt creep in. What if the locket truly was gone? What if his efforts were in vain? But then he thought of his grandmother's face, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief when he had promised to find it. He couldn't let her down, not when he had come this far. With renewed determination, he vowed to continue his search, no matter how long it took. Little did he know, his journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would bring him closer to the locket and to the truths it held than he ever could have imagined. It was a rainy afternoon when the breakthrough finally came. The grandson had driven several hours to a neighboring city, following yet another faint lead. The streets were slick with rain, and the windshield wipers rhythmically swept back and forth as he navigated the unfamiliar neighborhood. His destination was a small pawn shop tucked between a laundromat and a bakery, its neon sign flickering faintly in the downpour. The shop, like so many others he had visited, seemed unremarkable at first glance, its window display filled with an eclectic mix of vintage watches, tarnished jewelry, and musical instruments. But something about the place gave him a sense of cautious optimism, a quiet voice in his heart urging him to step inside. As he pushed open the heavy glass door, the faint chime of a bell announced his arrival. The shop smelled of aged wood and metal, the kind of scent that spoke of countless stories and lives intersecting in one place. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She greeted him, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the rain outside. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of his journey pressing down on him. Then, summoning his courage, he explained why he was there. "I'm looking for a gold locket," he began, pulling out the sketch he always carried. "It belonged to my grandmother, and it's been missing for decades. I've been tracing its path, and I think it might have passed through here." The woman took the sketch, her brow furrowing as she studied the intricate design he had so carefully drawn. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but I don't think I've seen anything like this recently. Let me check our records just to be sure." She disappeared into the back room, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He had been in this position before, so many times, in fact, that he had lost count. Yet each time he felt the same mixture of hope and dread. What if this was another dead end? What if the locket truly was gone? He paced the shop, his eyes wandering over the items on display, each one a fragment of someone's life. A vintage camera caught his attention, its leather strap worn smooth by years of use. Nearby, a stack of faded postcards hinted at long-forgotten travels and distant loves. He couldn't help but wonder about the stories behind these objects, how they had ended up here, and whether their owners missed them as deeply as his grandmother missed her locket. After what felt like an eternity, the woman returned, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding up a yellowed ledger. "We did have a locket like this come through, many years ago. But it didn't stay here long. It was sold to a collector. Let me see if I can find their information. His heart raced as she flipped through the pages, her finger tracing the handwritten entries. Finally, she stopped, her eyes lighting up with recognition. Here it is, she said, pointing to the name and contact information of a private collector who specialized in vintage jewelry. I remember this one now. It was a unique piece, and the collector paid a good price for it. The grandson felt a surge of hope, tempered by the realization that his journey was far from over. He thanked the woman profusely, her kindness and willingness to help reigniting his determination. She wished him luck as he stepped back into the rain, clutching the slip of paper with the collector's details like a lifeline. He didn't waste any time, dialing the number as soon as he got back to his car. The phone rang several times before a deep, measured voice answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as the collector, and the grandson wasted no time explaining his situation. He spoke with passion, detailing the locket's significance and his grandmother's longing to see it again. The man listened patiently, his silence punctuated by the occasional hum of acknowledgement. When the grandson finally finished, the collector's response was measured but kind. I understand your sentiment, he said, but you should know that the locket is part of my private collection now. It's not something I part with lightly. Disappointment washed over the grandson, but he refused to give up. Please, he said, his voice tinged with desperation. This locket means everything to my grandmother. If there's any way at all that I could convince you to let me have it, I'd be eternally grateful. There was a long pause, the kind that felt like it stretched across eternity. Then the collector spoke again, his tone softening. I'm not an unreasonable man. I'll tell you what, I'm hosting a private showing of my collection next month. If you can come, we'll discuss this further. But I can't make any promises. Though it wasn't the answer he had hoped for, it was a glimmer of possibility. He thanked the collector, promising to attend the event no matter what it took. As he ended the call, he couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and anxiety. The locket was within reach, but the journey to reclaim it was far from over. Still, as he drove home through the rain, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, he could see a path forward, a path that might lead him back to the locket and, more importantly, to the joy it would bring his grandmother. The weeks leading up to the collector's private showing passed in a whirlwind of anticipation and uncertainty. The grandson spent every spare moment preparing for the event, researching the world of antique collectors and strategizing how to convince the man to part with the locket. He rehearsed his story countless times, imagining every possible argument and appeal he might need to make. Yet, beneath his determination, there lingered an unsettling question. What if the collector refused? What if, after all his efforts, the locket remained beyond his grasp? The thought haunted him, but he refused to let it deter him. For his grandmother, for the legacy she cherished, he had to try. The day of the event arrived, and the grandson found himself standing outside a grand estate on the outskirts of the city. The mansion loomed before him, its towering columns and manicured gardens exuding an air of opulence and exclusivity. He felt out of place among the well-dressed attendees, many of whom seemed to belong to a world he could barely comprehend. Clutching the invitation he had received, he took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior of the mansion was even more extravagant, its rooms adorned with priceless artifacts and artwork. The private collection was displayed in a sprawling gallery, each item carefully curated and presented with meticulous attention to detail. The grandson's eyes scanned the room, searching for the locket amidst the glittering array of treasures. His heart skipped a beat when he finally spotted it, displayed in a glass case under a soft spotlight. It was just as his grandmother had described, its delicate gold filigree catching the light, its tiny clasp holding untold stories within. Seeing it in person, he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. relief, longing, and a deep sense of connection to his family's past. But his moment of reverence was interrupted by the voice of the collector, who approached with an air of polite curiosity. The man was older, with a distinguished appearance and a demeanor that exuded both authority and warmth. "You must be the young man who called about the locket," he said, extending a hand. "I'm pleased you could make it." The grandson shook his hand, his nerves threatening to get the better of him. "Thank you for inviting me," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "It's an honor to be here." The collector gestured for him to follow, leading him to a quieter corner of the gallery. "I must admit," the man began, "I've never encountered anyone quite so determined to recover an item from my collection. Tell me, why does this locket mean so much to you?" The grandson took a deep breath, recounting his grandmother's story with as much detail and emotion as he could muster. He spoke of the locket's history, its significance as a family heirloom, and the heartbreak it had caused when it was lost. He described his grandmother's unwavering love for her parents, the sacrifices they had made, and the values they had instilled in her. By the time he finished, his voice was thick with emotion, and the collector's expression had softened. "It's a compelling story," the man admitted. "But you must understand, this locket is not just a trinket to me. It's a piece of history, a testament to the craftsmanship and artistry of its time. Letting go of it would not be an easy decision." The grandson nodded, his heart sinking. "I understand," he said quietly, "but this isn't about money or craftsmanship for me. It's about family. This locket is part of who we are, and I can't imagine letting it remain here, what could mean so much more to my grandmother." The collector studied him for a long moment, his gaze piercing yet thoughtful. "I admire your passion," he said finally. "But there's another consideration here. This locket has been in my collection for years. To part with it now would be to let go of something I've come to value deeply. The question, then, is whose claim holds greater weight, yours or mine?" The grandson was taken aback by the man's candor. It was a moral dilemma he hadn't fully anticipated, one that forced him to confront the complexity of his quest. He had always seen the locket as rightfully his grandmother's, but now he realized that, to the collector, it represented something entirely different, a piece of a broader tapestry, a connection to history that transcended any one family. "I can't deny that you've cared for the locket," the grandson admitted, his voice heavy with sincerity. "But I believe its true home is with my grandmother. She's the one who has lived with its absence, who has carried the weight of its loss. To her, it's not just an object. It's a piece of her heart." The collector nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You make a compelling case," he said, "but I'll need time to consider this. In the meantime, why don't you stay and enjoy the rest of the evening? Perhaps we'll both gain some clarity before the night is over." Though the conversation left him uncertain, the grandson took the man's words to heart. He spent the rest of the evening mingling with other guests, learning about their connections to the artifacts on display. Each story he heard reinforced his belief in the locket's importance, not just as an object, but as a vessel for the memories and emotions that defined their humanity. As the event drew to a close, the collector approached him once more. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm willing to part with the locket on one condition." The grandson's heart leapt, but he forced himself to remain composed. "What's the condition?" he asked. The collector smiled faintly. "You must promise to preserve its legacy, not just for your family, but for the generations to come. This locket holds stories that deserve to be remembered, and it's up to you to ensure they're never forgotten." Without hesitation, the grandson extended his hand. "I promise," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." The morning was crisp and bright as the grandson arrived at his grandmother's house, the locket safely nestled in a small velvet pouch in his jacket pocket. His heart raced with anticipation, each beat echoing the enormity of what he was about to do. He had imagined this moment countless times during his search, picturing the look on her face when she saw the locket again. Yet now, standing at her door, he felt a flicker of doubt. Would it be everything she hoped for? Would it bring her joy, or reopen wounds she had tried to close? Taking a deep breath, he knocked lightly and waited. The door creaked open to reveal his grandmother, her kind eyes lighting up as they always did when she saw him. "You're early, dear," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "What's the occasion?" He smiled, his nerves hidden behind a mask of calm. "I have something for you, Grandma," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. "Something I think you'll want to see." She raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued, and followed him to the living room. As they settled into their usual spots, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the pouch. For a moment, he simply held it, the weight of the locket heavy in his palm, not just in a physical sense, but in the emotional significance it carried. Finally, he extended it toward her, his voice soft. "This belongs to you." Her brow furrowed in confusion as she took the pouch and carefully opened it. The moment her fingers touched the cool gold surface of the locket, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. She held it up, her hands trembling, and let out a soft gasp as her eyes took in the familiar design. "Is this?" she whispered, her voice trailing off as tears welled in her eyes. "It's yours," he said gently. "I found it." Her fingers traced the delicate filigree, her eyes filling with wonder and disbelief. For a long moment, she said nothing, her emotions too overwhelming to put into words. Then, with trembling hands, she opened the locket, revealing the photograph and the note inside. Both were slightly faded with age, but still intact, their essence preserved through the years. She stared at the photograph, her parents' faces gazing back at her, and let out a sob that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. "Oh, my sweet boy," she said, her voice breaking. How did you do this?" He reached out to hold her hand, his own eyes misting with tears. "I couldn't stand the thought of you missing this any longer," he said. "I had to find it for us. It's part of who we are." She clutched the locket to her chest, her tears flowing freely now. "I thought it was gone forever," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't believe it's here in my hands. You've given me back a piece of my heart." The moment was as profound as it was bittersweet. As the initial wave of emotion subsided, she began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity. She recounted memories of her parents, stories she hadn't told in years, each one brought to life by the locket's presence. She spoke of her father's quiet strength, her mother's boundless kindness, and the way they had faced life's challenges together. The grandson listened intently, his heart swelling with pride and love for the woman who had raised him. But as the locket brought joy, it also unearthed hidden pain. She revealed, for the first time, the circumstances surrounding its loss. It had been a difficult time in her life, marked by financial struggles and the weight of raising a family on her own. She had pawned the locket out of desperation, hoping to buy it back when things improved. But life had a way of complicating even the best intentions, and the locket had slipped through her fingers, lost to the tide of circumstances beyond her control. "I've carried the guilt of that decision for so long," she admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "It felt like I had failed, not just myself, but my parents. Losing this locket was like losing them all over again." The grandson's heart ached at her words. "You didn't fail them, Grandma," he said firmly. "You did what you had to do to take care of your family. And now it's back where it belongs. That's what matters." She looked at him, her tear-streaked face softening with gratitude. "You've given me more than you know," she said. "This locket isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a reminder of who we are, of the love and strength that runs through our family. And now it's a reminder of you, of the lengths you went to for me." They sat together for hours, the locket resting in her hands like a long-lost friend. She shared stories she had kept locked away, stories that painted a fuller picture of the family they both cherished. For the grandson, it was a gift beyond measure, to hear her history, to understand her sacrifices, and to feel the depth of her love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the room, the grandmother held the locket up to the light. "This locket has seen so much," she said softly, "but it's not just mine anymore. It's ours." The grandson nodded, his heart full. "And it always will be." The days following the locket's return were filled with a renewed sense of connection and warmth. The grandson visited his grandmother more often, eager to hear more stories that had lain dormant for years. The locket seemed to unlock a part of her she had kept hidden, her voice lighter and her laughter more frequent. But amidst the joy, there was an underlying tension, one the grandson couldn't ignore. The story of how the locket had been lost, how it had been pawned in a moment of desperation, left unanswered questions. His grandmother's words hinted at a deeper truth, a shadow she had not yet fully revealed. It wasn't until one quiet afternoon, as they sat together in her living room, that he finally broached the subject. "Grandma," he began hesitantly, "you said you pawned the locket all those years ago. But was that the whole story? It feels like there's more you haven't told me." Her expression faltered, a flicker of pain crossing her face. She set her teacup down, her hands clasping together as if bracing herself. "I wasn't entirely honest with you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more to it, and I suppose you deserve to know." She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the locket resting on the table between them. "At the time, I was raising your father and your uncle on my own. Money was tight, tighter than I ever let on. I thought I could manage, but things kept piling up. One day, I came home to find that the locket was gone. At first, I thought I had misplaced it, but then I realized." Her voice broke, and she paused to collect herself. "It was your uncle. He took it and pawned it without telling me." The grandson's stomach tightened at her words. His uncle, his father's younger brother, had always been something of a black sheep in the family, charming but unreliable, with a history of poor decisions that had strained their relationships. "Why would he do that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "He was young and impulsive," she said, her tone heavy with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "He was in trouble, gambling debts mostly. He thought he could pawn the locket, pay off what he owed, and somehow get it back before I noticed. But life rarely works out the way we hope, does it?" The grandson shook his head, his emotions warring within him. He had always respected his uncle, despite his flaws, but this revelation painted him in a new light. "Did he ever admit it?" he asked. "Did he ever try to make things right?" Her expression softened, and she nodded. "He confessed years later, when the guilt became too much for him. By then, it was too late, the locket was gone, and we had no way of finding it. He begged for my forgiveness, and I gave it to him, but I never quite forgave myself. I should have seen the signs, should have done more to protect what mattered." The grandson leaned forward, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "You can't blame yourself for that, Grandma. You did the best you could. And it's not your fault he made those choices." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with tears. "You sound so much like your father," she said. "He always said the same thing. He was furious when he found out, didn't speak to your uncle for years. But eventually, he let it go. Family, after all, is more than the mistakes we make. It's about how we find our way back to each other." The grandson's mind swirled with thoughts of his uncle, of the complicated dynamics that had shaped their family. He felt a sudden urge to confront him, to demand answers and hold him accountable for the pain he had caused. But as he looked at his grandmother, her face etched with both sorrow and forgiveness, he realized that anger wouldn't solve anything. If she could forgive, so could he, or at least he could try. "Does he know you have the locket back?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I haven't spoken to him about it. I wasn't sure if I should." The grandson reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "Maybe it's time to have that conversation," he said. "Not just for him, but for you. This locket has already brought us closer. Maybe it can help heal the rift with him too." Her eyes searched his, a mixture of hope and apprehension in her gaze. "Do you really think so?" she asked. "I do," he said, "but only if you're ready. I'll be there with you, every step of the way." The decision wasn't an easy one, but the following weekend, they invited his uncle over for tea. The atmosphere was tense at first, the air thick with unspoken words and lingering regrets. But as the conversation unfolded, as the grandmother showed him a locket and recounted the grandson's journey to recover it, something shifted. The uncle, now a man weathered by time and experience, broke down in tears, his remorse pouring out in a torrent of words. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I thought I was fixing things, but all I did was make them worse. I've regretted it every day since." The grandmother reached out, her hand steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said softly, "but now it's time for you to forgive yourself. This locket is back where it belongs, and so are we. Let's not let the past keep us apart any longer." The moment was raw and powerful, a testament to the resilience of family and the capacity for forgiveness. As they sat together, sharing stories and laughter for the first time in years, the grandson felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The locket had done more than reconnect his grandmother to her past. It had brought their family closer, healing wounds that had festered for far too long. The days that followed the reunion felt like a new beginning for the family. The locket, once a symbol of loss and regret, had become a beacon of healing and reconciliation. Its return had sparked conversations long overdue, bridging gaps that had widened over decades. Yet, as the family began to move forward, the grandson couldn't shake the feeling that the locket story wasn't entirely finished. He sensed that its return was not just about reconnecting the past with the present, but about charting a new course for their future, a course that would demand decisions they hadn't yet faced. One crisp morning, as he sat with his grandmother on the porch, sipping tea and watching the golden hues of autumn dance across the yard, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking a lot about the locket," she began, her voice soft but steady. "About what it means to me, to us, and what its place should be now." He set his cup down, sensing the weight of her words. "What do you mean?" he asked. She held the locket in her hands, turning it over gently as though it were a living thing. "It's brought us so much already. Memories, reconciliation, understanding. But it's also a reminder of all the pain and struggle we've endured. I've carried this weight for so long, and now that it's back, I find myself wondering, should I keep it or should I let it go?" The question caught him off guard. After all they had gone through to reclaim the locket, the idea of parting with it seemed unthinkable. "Let it go," he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Why would you even consider that?" Her eyes softened, and she reached for his hand. "Because it's not just about holding on to the past," she said. "It's about finding peace with it. This locket is more than a keepsake. It's a story, one that belongs to all of us. And I wonder if its true purpose is to remind us to cherish the present, rather than cling to what's already gone." He nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in her words even as he grappled with the idea. "What would letting it go look like?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I think it might mean sharing its story, ensuring it continues to touch lives beyond ours. Maybe it means passing it on to you someday, or maybe it means finding a way for it to inspire others, just as it has inspired us." The thought stirred something in him, a sense of responsibility that both humbled and challenged him. He had spent so much of his life focused on his own ambitions, never considering the deeper legacies he might carry forward. Now, as he looked at the locket, he saw it not just as a piece of his family's past, but as a symbol of the values that had shaped them: resilience, love, and forgiveness. Later that week, the family gathered again, this time to discuss the locket's future. It was an emotional conversation, one filled with reflections on its meaning and the journey they had all taken to bring it back. The uncle, who had once been the source of its loss, spoke with a sincerity that moved them all. "This locket doesn't just belong to Mom," he said. "It belongs to all of us. And I think it's time we decide together what its next chapter should be." The grandmother listened carefully, her heart full as each family member shared their thoughts. Some believed the locket should remain with her, a testament to her strength and the sacrifices she had made. Others felt it should eventually be passed down to the grandson, who had gone to such great lengths to reclaim it. But it was her own voice that brought the conversation to its conclusion. "I think the locket's place is with us," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "Not as a possession, but as a reminder. A reminder of where we've been, what we've endured, and how far we've come. I want us to keep it safe together and to let its story guide us in the years to come." The decision brought a sense of closure, a feeling that the locket had finally found its rightful place, not just in their home, but in their hearts. It became a cherished part of their family traditions, brought out during gatherings and celebrations as a symbol of their unity. And in moments of doubt or hardship, its presence served as a beacon, reminding them of the strength they shared. But the story of the locket didn't end there. Inspired by his grandmother's wisdom, the grandson decided to share its tale with the world. He wrote an article for a local newspaper, detailing the journey they had taken to recover it and the lessons it had taught them about love, forgiveness, and the enduring bonds of family. The story resonated deeply with readers, sparking conversations about the heirlooms and memories that connect us all. Months later, the grandson received a letter from a woman who had read his article. She shared her own story of a lost family treasure and the impact its absence had had on her life. Her words were a poignant reminder of how universal their experience truly was. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "Hope that what we lose is never truly gone, and that the love we carry is stronger than anything that can be taken from us." As the grandson read her words, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The locket had not only brought his family together, but had also become a source of inspiration for others. It was a legacy that extended far beyond the gold and glass of its physical form, a legacy of resilience, love, and the enduring power of connection. And so, as the seasons turned and the family continued to grow, the locket remained a constant presence, a reminder of the past, a celebration of the present, and a promise for the future. In its small, unassuming way, it had become more than an heirloom. It had become a symbol of hope, proving that even what is lost can sometimes find its way home.